Moykilen was only 10 years old, but his brown eyes carried the weight of someone who had already witnessed far more than he should. His messy hair fell over his forehead, framing a face that hid a fierce determination. Sitting at the kitchen table, he leaned over a battered notebook, his lips moving silently as he worked through a math problem. The pencil tip moved carefully across the page, as though every line he drew was a brick being laid for a stronger, safer future. In that small world of graphite and paper, Moykilen seemed like an ordinary child. But deep down, he knew he didn't have the luxury of being just that. Suddenly, the sharp sound of a door slamming shattered the fragile silence. His father's voice erupted like a storm, cutting through the room. "You always have to be right, don't you? Always finding a way to criticize everything," his father bellowed. His mother's voice followed, equally sharp and unrelenting. "And you? Do you ever think about what you're destroying?" She shot back. It was a cruel dance of anger and blame, a pattern Moykilen knew all too well. His fingers tightened around the pencil as he tried to cling to the math problem in front of him, his only lifeboat in the chaos. The shouting grew louder, each accusation a fresh wave crashing against him. "Moykilen, go to your room," his mother yelled suddenly, her voice slicing through the tension. Moykilen froze, his eyes lifting slowly. He hesitated for a moment. "But I just wanted to finish this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Now, Moykilen," his father commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. The boy didn't respond. He simply closed his notebook, clutching it tightly as he rose from his seat. With slow, measured steps, he walked to his room, his head hanging low, as though carrying an invisible weight. Behind him, the shouting resumed, filling the house like a thunderstorm that refused to pass. His room was small, its green-painted walls faded with time. A narrow window let in a sliver of moonlight, illuminating the makeshift shelves lined with old books. Moykilen sat cross-legged on the floor, placing his notebook in front of him. He opened it again, his pencil resuming its steady path across the page. "One day, all of this will change," he whispered to himself, his voice steady, despite the turmoil outside. Math wasn't just a subject for Moykilen. It was his sanctuary, a place where problems had solutions and order prevailed. In a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable, numbers were his refuge. Later that night, the shouting subsided, leaving a tense silence in its wake. Footsteps approached his door, and it opened slowly. His mother stood there, her face lined with exhaustion, her eyes red from crying. "Moykilen, are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice heavy with guilt. He glanced up briefly. "I'm fine. Just studying," he replied, his tone neutral. She lingered in the doorway, as if searching for words she couldn't find. Finally, she sighed and closed the door, leaving him alone once again. Moykilen turned back to his notebook, the sound of the pencil scratching against the paper, the only noise in the room. The next day, school offered Moykilen a temporary escape from the chaos at home. Sitting in the second row, he opened his notebook and prepared for the lesson. For Moykilen, the classroom was more than just a place to learn. It was a haven where he could focus on a bigger world, one where the noise of his home couldn't reach him. He thrived in the classroom, his hand always the first to shoot up, his mind working faster than most. Mr. Howard, the math teacher, walked into the room with his usual commanding presence. His sharp gaze swept across the students, silencing any lingering chatter. Known for his strict discipline and sharp wit, Mr. Howard was both respected and feared. To Moykilen, he was a challenge, a mentor who embodied the precision and order Moykilen admired in mathematics. "Let's get started," Mr. Howard announced, writing a complex equation on the board. His movements were deliberate, his voice crisp. Mistakes were not tolerated in his class, and interruptions even less so. Moykilen followed the lesson intently, his pencil moving swiftly across the page. But something didn't add up. A variable in the equation was misplaced. He hesitated, glancing around the room. Should he say something? The memory of his father's sharp reprimands flashed in his mind, but so did his commitment to the truth. Slowly he raised his hand. Mr. Howard, he began cautiously, I think there's an error in the equation. The variable should be in the numerator, not the denominator. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Moykilen and then to Mr. Howard. The teacher paused, his chalk hovering mid-air. Slowly he turned to face the boy, his expression hardening. You think you've caught a mistake, Moykilen? He asked, his tone sharp with disbelief. Moykilen nodded, his heart pounding. Yes, sir, I believe. The words cut deep, but Moykilen kept his composure. Understood, sir, he replied quietly, lowering his eyes to his notebook. The whispers among his classmates stung, but he refused to let them see how much the reprimand affected him. The lesson continued, but Moykilen felt the weight of Mr. Howard's words pressing down on him. He hadn't meant to challenge the teacher, only to help. As the class ended, Moykilen lingered behind, pretending to pack his things while the room emptied. Mr. Howard erased the board with quick, almost angry strokes, not sparing Moykilen a glance. Moykilen wanted to speak, to explain himself, but the words wouldn't come. He left the classroom in silence, his footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. That evening, Moykilen sat in his room staring at his notebook. Doubt crept into his mind. Was he wrong to speak up? But deep down, he knew the answer. He had been right, and yet it felt like he was being punished. The next day, Moykilen returned to class with renewed determination. He wouldn't let one incident hold him back. But when Mr. Howard made another mistake, Moykilen hesitated. The memory of the previous day's reprimand loomed large. Still, his drive for accuracy outweighed his fear. Mr. Howard, he said cautiously, raising his hand, I think the denominator should be simplified first. The room fell silent once more. Mr. Howard froze, his back to the students. Slowly he turned, his expression unreadable. Moykilen braced himself for another harsh response, but instead Mr. Howard nodded. You're correct, he said, his voice calm but strained. Thank you for pointing that out. The class erupted into murmurs, surprised by the teacher's acknowledgement. Moykilen felt a flicker of validation. Perhaps Mr. Howard wasn't entirely unwilling to admit his mistakes. In the weeks that followed, a subtle shift occurred. Mr. Howard began challenging Moykilen with more complex problems, engaging him in ways he hadn't before. Moykilen realized that the teacher's stern demeanor masked a respect for students who showed genuine potential. One afternoon, as the class emptied, Mr. Howard called Moykilen to his desk. Moykilen, he began, his tone softer than usual. I've noticed your dedication and talent. I want to recommend you for an advanced mathematics competition. It's a national level event, and I believe you'd excel. Moykilen's eyes widened. A competition? He repeated. Yes, Mr. Howard said. It won't be easy, but I believe you're capable. What do you think? Moykilen hesitated briefly before nodding firmly. I'll do it, he said. From that day on, Mr. Howard became a mentor. Together, they worked after school, tackling complex problems and preparing for the competition. Through these sessions, Moykilen saw a different side of the teacher, a man deeply passionate about math and his students' success. When the day of the competition arrived, Moykilen entered the venue with nerves and determination. The room buzzed with energy as students from across the country gathered, each ready to prove their skills. Moykilen focused on the problems before him, his pencil flying across the page. Hours later, the results were announced. Moykilen's name was called as the winner. The applause was deafening, but Moykilen's eyes searched the crowd until they found Mr. Howard. The teacher stood silently, his expression one of quiet pride. In that moment, Moykilen realized that his victory wasn't just his own. It was a testament to resilience, determination, and the power of mentorship. As he held his award, Moykilen felt a sense of clarity. His journey was far from over, but he now knew he had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As Moykilen left the venue, the cool evening air brushed against his face. He clutched the trophy tightly, a symbol of how far he had come. His mother waited outside, her eyes filled with tears of pride and love. She embraced him tightly, whispering, "You did it, Moykilen. I'm so proud of you." Looking over her shoulder, Moykilen saw his father standing at a distance. There was hesitation in his stance, but his eyes carried something new, perhaps regret or even admiration. Moykilen walked over and extended the trophy toward him. "We all make mistakes," Moykilen said softly. "What matters is what we do after them." His father's expression softened as he accepted the trophy, nodding slowly. In that moment, Moykilen felt something shift, a step toward healing, a chance for a new beginning. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, Moykilen felt the weight on his shoulders lighten. Together, they walked toward the future, one step at a time.